General Horvath of the Kellon shock troops had watched soldiers die, before burned in plasma crossfire, crushed by hull breaches, silenced mid-scream by neural disruptors. He knew what collapse looked like. He knew the sound a body made when it finally quit. So when 3 of his finest warriors folded on the training field like puppets with their strings cut, Horvath's first thought was sabotage. They hit the red dirt hard, armor plates clacking, breath hissing through their respirators in ragged, panicked bursts. One tried to rise, claws digging in, then sagged again with a low, shameful groan. The others lay on their sides, legs twitching, as if the ground itself had become hostile. Across the field, the human instructor, Lieutenant Mara Briggs, didn't even slow down. She kept moving at the same steady pace, boots landing rhythmically, posture loose, shoulders relaxed. A sheen of sweat darkened the collar of her fatigues, but her breathing was controlled, almost casual. She looked, to Horvath's eyes, like someone out for a leisurely patrol. Horvath stepped forward, the edge of his cloak snapping in the wind. "Lieutenant," he barked in Imperial Standard. "Stop." Briggs slowed to a walk and tapped the side of her wrist, waking a small luminous screen strapped there. She glanced at it, frowned, then looked up at him as if he'd interrupted her while she was counting. "We're only at 7 kilometers, she said. Horvath stared. The number meant nothing in isolation. Distance on most worlds was measured by practical necessity, not by how far an organism could move under its own power. 7, and you have broken my soldiers." Briggs blinked, then followed his gaze to the downed Kellon. Medics were already jogging out, their compact kits bouncing against their hips. One of Horvath's warriors tried to wave them away, pride overriding physiology. But the movement became a tremor, and then stillness. "General," Briggs said carefully, "they're not dying. They are collapsing." Horvath snapped. "That is the beginning of dying." Briggs's mouth pulled into a strange expression, half sympathy, half annoyance. "They're exhausted. They're not used to sustained aerobic activity." She glanced back down at her tracker, then up again. "We have 13 more kilometers to go." A heartbeat passed where Horvath was sure he'd misheard. He had learned humans could lie with frightening ease, but Briggs's face held no deceit, only matter-of-fact certainty. "You are telling me," he said slowly, "that this is not an endurance trial. This is not a punishment exercise. This is, what did you call it?" He searched for the word his translators had flagged earlier. "A jog." Briggs nodded. "Casual morning jog." "Yes." Horvath felt something. Cold twist beneath his ribs. 6 months ago, the Kellon Empire had recruited humanity as auxiliary forces cheap. Plentiful bodies from a newly contacted world still arguing among itself about borders and belief systems. Humans were technologically inferior, their ships crude, their energy weapons underpowered. But their soldiers had proven unexpectedly effective on the ground. High Command had assumed it was desperation, or clever tactics, or the simple brutality of a species willing to throw itself into the grinder. No report had mentioned this. Horvath took 2 steps toward the nearest fallen warrior. The soldier's throat sac fluttered rapidly, trying to pull in air. His eyes were wide and unfocused, pupils blown. Foam glistened along the ridge of his mouth. "This one," Horvath said, pointing. "This is Sergeant Vec. He climbed the outer hull of a burning cruiser to cut power to a boarding clamp. He survived vacuum exposure for 32 seconds." Horvath's voice rose. "He endured a neural disruptor blast that left 3 other species catatonic. And you are telling me he has been defeated by—" Moving his legs, Briggs crouched beside Vec, her hands sure and practiced. She placed 2 fingers lightly against the side of his neck. "Feeling for a pulse, your troops completed the obstacle course in record time," she said. "Fastest I've ever seen. Your species is incredibly strong, incredibly quick." She looked up at Horvath, eyes steady. "But your sprinters—" Horvath's frill flared in affront. "Speed and strength are what matter in combat." Briggs rose, dusting her hands. "Tell that to every prey animal on Earth that got run down by human hunters." Horvath scoffed. "Hunters pursue with vehicles, with drones, with energy nets. No species pursues with bare flesh." Briggs tilted her head. "On your worlds, maybe. On Earth, for most of our history, we didn't have better tools. So we became the tool." She took a step, gesturing for Horvath to walk with her as the medics began lifting the Kellon carefully onto stretchers. Horvath moved alongside her, cloak brushing the scrub grass, still watching his soldiers as if they might vanish into shame if he looked away. "We're not fast," Briggs continued. "Not compared to a lot of animals. Not compared to your people. But we're relentless. Relentless." The word sat heavy in Horvath's translator feed, tagged with multiple cultural definitions. Persistent, unyielding, unstoppable. It was an adjective usually reserved for machines, storms, and wars. "How far?" Horvath asked. "Can a human run?" Briggs's lips quirked again. "Depends on the human." She breathed in, deep and even, and Horvath realized with a jolt that she truly was not strained. "I once did 100-kilometer ultramarathon. Took me 14 hours. Horvath stopped walking. 100 kilometers, 14 hours. His mind tried to reject the numbers the way it rejected a glitching sensor readout. No biological organism could sustain that kind of output. A being could sprint until muscle tore. Yes, it could fight until its joints cracked. But ours, on purpose, that is impossible," Horvath said, voice low with certainty. "Your muscles would liquefy." Briggs shrugged. "They hurt." She said it like that explained everything. "But humans used to hunt by chasing animals until they died of exhaustion. We call it persistence hunting." Horvath's frill tightened. Images flashed through his memory. Kellon hunters bursting from cover, closing distances in a blur. Killing in a single brutal rush, efficient, clean, merciful, by the standards of war. "Your prey died," he said, "because it was weaker." Briggs shook her head. "A lot of prey were stronger, or faster, but they couldn't cool themselves the way we could." She tapped her temple, then her chest. "We sweat, we dump heat through our skin. That means we can keep running in the heat. When other animals have to stop and pant, stop long enough, and we get closer, and then closer again, until there's nowhere left to spend energy but in dying. Horvath's stomach knotted. So you are hunters who kill with patience? Pretty much, Briggs said. We're not the strongest species on our planet, not the fastest either, but we can outlast almost anything. A light-footed set of steps approached from behind. Horvath turned, expecting another medic. Instead, a human jogged up as if he were arriving at a picnic. He had dark skin, close-cropped hair, and a grin that belonged on a civilian advertisement. His breathing was easy. He lifted a hand in greeting. Morning, General. He called cheerfully. Beautiful day for a run. Horvath stared at him as if he'd just witnessed a soldier laughing in the middle of a hull breach. You find this easy? The human laughed. This is recovery pace. He rolled his shoulders like he was loosening up after sitting too long. Doesn't even count as real exercise. Briggs's gaze flicked to him, mild warning. In her expression, Private Denzel, keep moving. Yes, ma'am. He turned and began jogging in place, still smiling at Horvath. Want to see real running? Lieutenant Briggs here can do a 5-minute kilometer. That's when humans actually try. Horvath's throat went dry. A 5-minute kilometer. He imagined his shock troopers sprinting in full armor across a battlefield. Blasting through cover, they could reach that speed briefly, for perhaps a minute, two. If the gods were feeling generous, Briggs did not deny it. She just exhaled, and her eyes held the weary pride of someone used to being underestimated. Horvath watched as medics carried away every single one of his elite soldiers. His warriors who had breached fortified positions and survived vacuum. Exposure were being hauled off a training field because a human had decided this morning. Should include light exercise. I need to understand this, Horvath said quietly as they continued walking. Why are humans built this way? Briggs glanced at the horizon where the base perimeter shimmered with heat. Earth is what our scientists call a death world, she said. High gravity, predators, extreme climates, diseases, lots of ways to die. Horvath grunted. So you adapted. We evolved to outlast, Briggs corrected. We have springy tendons that store energy. We're efficient with oxygen. We can regulate heat through sweat in a way most species can't. And she hesitated, then smiled with something that looked like self-awareness. We've got a psychological quirk where we can ignore pain and fatigue if we're motivated enough. Horvath's translator flagged the phrase ignore pain as potential idiom, but her tone said she meant it literally. That sounds, Horvath said, like a design flaw. Briggs's eyes flicked to the medics disappearing with Horvath's. Warriors, maybe. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Or maybe it's why we're here. They reached the end of the track. A small group of humans were stretching near the tree line, chatting as if they hadn't just run farther than most Kellon armored vehicles. Traveled during a patrol. One of them waved at Briggs. Lieutenant, a voice called. Permission to add hill sprints after the run. Briggs didn't even look annoyed. Approved. Roger. The human sergeant. Yuki, according to Horvath's, had jogged past at an easy pace, then called back. Don't forget your cool-down stretches. Yes, ma'am, Yuki answered, already accelerating toward the hills. Horvath watched her disappear down the trail like a guided missile with a sense of humor. "Your species," Horvath muttered, "is insane." Briggs's smile softened. "Probably. But we're insane in useful ways." 3 weeks later, Horvath stood in the shadow of a shattered ridge and watched usefulness turn into doctrine. The joint operation had begun as most did, shock troops first. Kellon's squads had slammed into the enemy's outer positions with speed and violence. Leveraging their strength, their explosive bursts of movement, their ability to overwhelm in seconds. It had worked at first. The defenders had fallen back, leaving bodies and scorched barricades behind. Then the assault stalled. Enemy fire raked the open ground. Drones screamed overhead. Dropping fragmentation charges, the Kellon pushed forward, in furious surges, and then, inevitably, slowed. Their breaths came harder. Their muscles began to shake. Every burst of effort cost more than the last. Their bodies, built to dominate in short engagements, did what biology demanded. They demanded rest. "General," one of Horvath's captains said, voice tight through comms, "we cannot sustain pressure. We require a regroup." Horvath scanned the battlefield, jaw clenched. The enemy wasn't stronger. It wasn't even better armed. It was simply entrenched, patient, and waiting for the moment the Kellon's initial storm ran out of wind. Then Briggs's voice cut in, calm as a morning briefing. "Horvath, we're moving." "Moving where?" Horvath demanded. "Flank. 12 clicks through rough terrain. We'll hit their rear supply line." Horvath blinked. 12 kilometers, with full combat load. "Correct," Briggs said. "No rational species would attempt such." "Good," Briggs replied. "Then they won't expect it." Horvath watched through a forward drone feed as Briggs's platoon peeled off the main line and vanished into jagged terrain, a mess of broken stone, thorn scrub, steep gullies, and heat that made Kellon's soldiers wilt even in their cooling suits. Humans moved into it like water finding cracks. At first they jogged, not sprinted, not charged, jogged, steady pace, efficient stride, rifles slung, packs tight against their backs. Their helmets bobbed as if tethered to an invisible metronome. Minutes became hours. The Kellon held the line, bleeding and straining, their bodies, screaming for the rest they could not afford. Horvath's claws dug into his command post railing as he tracked the human feed. He expected them to slow, to stop, to crouch in the shade, gasping. They did not. They sweated, faces shining beneath visors. They breathed hard, yes, but they kept moving. When one stumbled, another grabbed their harness and pulled them forward without a word. When the terrain rose, they leaned into it. When it dropped, they controlled their descent like practiced climbers. They did not waste energy on panic. They did not waste it on complaint. They simply went. And then when the feed showed the enemy's rear ridge line, Briggs's platoon emerged like ghosts. Exhausted, yes, shoulders sagging, hands shaking, slightly as they raised weapons, but functional. Alive with a kind of stubborn momentum Horvath could feel even through a screen. They hit the supply line with surgical violence. Ammunition dumps erupted. Power relays blew. Drones dropped out of the sky like swatted insects. The enemy's front line wavered as their lifeline disappeared behind them. Horvath seized the moment. "Shock troops," he roared. "Advance." Kellon's squad surged forward again, renewed by the shift. This time the enemy broke. The battle ended not with a glorious final charge, but with a quiet, inevitable unraveling like something that had been decided hours ago by a species that didn't understand how to quit. Afterward, Horvath found Briggs sitting on a rock near. The triage tense, helmet off, hair damp with sweat. She drank from a canteen in slow, careful pulls. Her eyes were tired. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked, in that moment, profoundly human, fragile, worn, held together by something that was not strength. "How?" Horvath asked. He didn't bother with rank. He didn't bother with pride. "How did you keep going when your body is screaming for you to stop?" Briggs lowered the canteen and met his gaze. For a moment she was silent, as if searching for words small enough to fit inside alien understanding. "Because stopping was never an option for our ancestors," she said at last. "The humans who couldn't push through pain died. The ones who could passed on their genes." Horvath's frill lowered, a gesture he didn't realize he was making until it was done. He remembered his warriors on the training field, proud and broken. He remembered the human platoon jogging into terrain that would have killed lesser species simply by existing. "We are the descendants," Briggs continued, voice quiet, "of the most stubborn, persistent, pain-ignoring survivors Earth ever produced." Horvath's throat worked around a hard swallow. "Your planet created monsters," he said. Briggs shook her head, expression firm. "Our planet created survivors. There's a difference." Horvath looked past her, toward the horizon where smoke smeared the sky. He thought about classifications, shock troops, auxiliaries, specialists. Words that shaped doctrine, doctrine that shaped wars. High Command had labeled humans auxiliary because it was convenient, because it made sense to treat them as support for the Empire's true blades. But blades were not the only way to kill. Some predators did not strike fast. Some predators followed. Horvath returned to High Command with a new report. It was shorter than most. It did not praise human tactics or weapons. It did not flatter their technology or their politics. It contained one conclusion that made the reviewing officers go silent. Humanity should not be classified as auxiliary forces. They should be classified as pursuit specialists. They are not shock troops. They are hunters. They will follow you across continents. They will track you for days. They will run you down until you physically cannot continue, and then they will keep running. Horvath paused, remembering Lieutenant Briggs on the training field, barely winded at 7 kilometers, speaking of another 13 as if it were a minor inconvenience. Remembering Private Denzel calling it recovery pace. Remembering Sergeant Yuki requesting hill sprints, like a child asking for dessert. The humans called it a jog. The galaxy should call it what it truly was, a reminder that Earth creates beings who do not understand the concept of giving up. The report ended with one final recommendation, written in blunt imperial script so no officer could misinterpret it as exaggeration. Never, under any circumstances, try to outrun a human. They will catch you It is simply a matter of time.